So here we go. Tanu Rabbanan Mitzvas Chanukah. Brief recap. Last week, we went through different parts of the page about what the Gemara talks about with Chanukah. Why do we have Chanukah? What are the laws for lighting it? So we learned that we're supposed to light it at sunset when the feet of the Talmudai, the wood people, until they leave the marketplace. That's the time frame for lighting the menorah. And then we have the disagreement between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai wants to light in descending order, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Beis Hillel wants to light in ascending order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And there's different explanations. The general thing is that Hillel says, Maamar Mekadosh. When it comes to matters of holiness, we always want to add. We want to go up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we want to go up. Beis Shammai gives this whole explanation of bulls on Sukkot. That when we offer the bulls on Sukkot, we went from 13, 12, 11. Okay, obviously we have questions about that. The other things about why going up or why go down, because the potential days that are left and the days that are actual, that kind of stuff makes sense. So the real question we have is about the bulls of Sukkot and Chanukah. The last thing that we said is that the Chanukah menorah is supposed to be lit outside and not by your window, and then not by a table, whatever. Also, we have the actual story of Chanukah, the way the Gemara tells it over. My Chanukah, what's Chanukah? On the 25th of Kislev, we have 8 days of Chanukah, because after the Chashmonaim, they beat the Greek army. They went to the Beis HaMikdash, and they went into the sanctuary, and there's no oil. And the Greeks had defiled the sanctuary. Now, defiled the sanctuary, they could have looted the coffers, graffitied maybe on the walls. Maybe a lot of these other things happened. They knocked over a bunch of pictures. Yes, that may have happened, but the Gemara specifies about the crew's little jar of oil. But there was none that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol on it, and they found one, and there was only enough for one night, and then it lasted 8 nights, and that's how we celebrate Hanukkah. We have a lot of questions on this. One question we have is the 8 days of Hanukkah and the bulls on Sukkot, what do they have to do with each other? Oh, Hanukkah and Sukkot are both 8 days. Okay, fine, but Hanukkah is lighting a menorah, the bulls are the sacrifices. We still light the menorah, we don't have the sacrifices. These are two totally different services. What is the connection there? And it's not just that, there has to be something even higher than the realm that we live in now. There's something going on with Hanukkah and with Sukkot, and that's the reason why down here on this world they have 8 days. So we're kind of looking at it now from the, not just, oh, we have the miracle, so it's 8 days, whatever. It's like, no, there's something going on in Hanukkah that's a much higher thing, and that resulted in it being an 8-day holiday. So we're looking at it from the spiritual, how it impacts the physical. Another question we have is that if the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash had 7 lamps on it, why does the Chanukah menorah have 8? Isn't the whole thing we commemorate? Okay, so it doesn't look like the menorah for the Beis HaMikdash. Also, the time of the lighting. In the Beis HaMikdash, they would light the menorah late afternoon, and we light it at sunset. So, are you commemorating the menorah for the Beis HaMikdash or not? These are the basic questions that we have. The point of everything that we're going to get to, and the point of the answer of everything, which is all these questions are going to feed into the same thing, is that the point of the Hanukkah lights is to illuminate the darkness. The whole reason why we're celebrating Hanukkah, the whole reason why we're lighting the menorah on Hanukkah, is because we're supposed to illuminate the spiritual darkness. We have physical light, which is the spiritual light to illuminate the physical / spiritual darkness. So now that the Maamar told us kind of the point of everything. Now we're going to do a whole deep dive, learning lots of, and then we're going to come back to it again. Where does this all start from is why do the Greeks, from everything, why is it so specific? And it emphasized the fact that the Greeks defiled the oil in the Beis HaMikdash. Why don't tell us about anything else? It seems like there's something significant and important about the oil in the Beis HaMikdash. Basically, there's something else going on here. This is what we're going to get into tonight. The one thing that we have, there is an emphasis on the oil, because oil, from everything, there's something extra holy about oil. There's something about it that represents a higher level of holiness. We've seen this before. We have the word kodesh, it means holy. Something that's kodesh, something that's holy. Holiness is not the literal translation. The literal translation of it is separateness, something that's separate. That's the whole thing that we did about when people get married. Hayariat Mekadeshli, you're separate to me. Asher Kiddishanu, that God made us holy through the commandments. Not just made us holy, He separated us. You are mine. You are unto me. You are not like all the others. This line here, where Shemen Mishchas Kodesh, the Torah talks about when they were giving all the donations and stuff for the Mishkan. Shemen Mishchas Kodesh, it's an oil of holy anointment. What it's bringing here is that oil has a different status from among all the liquids. Look, it doesn't even tell us that they poured out all the libations. You ever read that when you're reading about the sacrifices? Like, they offered the bull with its libations, and you're like, oh, the libations, very nice. That's the wine that they would pour over everything. So I don't know why they can't just say they poured wine. But it doesn't even tell us about that. It's not like, oh, they smashed up all the wine. It's a travesty. It talks about the oil specifically. Because there's something about oil that represents a level that's not like other liquids. And here, it's actually interesting. It points out that there's a difference between the word kodesh and kadosh. You see, the letters are very much the same, but something that's kodesh, that's a noun. That means that this has inherent holiness to it. And kadosh is the adjective. This is something that is holy. When you use it as the adjective, it's become holy versus something that's kind of intrinsically holy. The noun, it's the state of being, versus the adjective, it's something that's come into it. It's a little sidebar here, but they put it on, when we talk about Shemen Mishchas Kodesh, oil, it's Kodesh, not Kadosh. It's the noun. There's something intrinsically holy about oil, about this level of oil. Just to emphasize this, I think it's the exact translation. We have here, this is from Devar Rav, I think it's talking about how, I think it was about Torah study and makes it unique, or this, that. Whatever it was described, there's 5 things, and one thing it was talking about was oil. Oil is given this description of like what makes oil different, the holy and unique and separate. This oil is a light for the whole world. After Torah or la'olam. The words of Torah are like light for the world. Oh yeah, he was connecting 5 different things to Torah study, to like Torah. So one of them was oil. So that's why we have this. Something else. This oil doesn't mix with other liquids. The Jewish people, they're not able to mix with. Avdei Kochavim means those who worship the stars. So it's a reference to like idolaters, kind of like the other nations. God says, I have separated you from the nations to be to me. It's driving home this thing about that there's something different about oil. So the Greeks smashing the oil, there was something else going on there besides like, oh, let's just wreck the place. Why oil from everything? Because oil is something that's indicative of something else, something different. From everything, oil does not mix. And it actually goes on. There's other descriptions here. It talks about how oil is something that rises to the top. So the Jewish people are people. They're like above. They rise to the top. Because of the divine mission that we have. There is something different about the Jewish people. Oil, we see light and like the Torah is light. And oil here that it doesn't mix. The Jewish people are separate people. You make a salad dressing, a vinaigrette. You can shake. You got to pour quickly because as soon as you let it sit, the oil's going to start drifting again. The oil does not mix. So what are the Greeks fighting against? It's not just like, oh, we came in to take over Jewish land and blah, 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 whatever. They're fighting against something much different. They're fighting against this idea of the not mixing. And we're not talking about it in this kind of like elitist sort of way. We're talking in the way of what our beliefs are, what we're holding on to. And especially look at the Greeks, their culture was a very different kind of culture. Everything that they stood for and everything they were fighting for was directly opposed to what the Jewish people were all about. So the war was not just a war of this physical dominion kind of thing, because they ruled the land of Israel. Well, when Alexander the Great came in, they basically took it over. But there was something beyond that was going on here. Because the Greek war was actually a spiritual war. Sure, there was the physical part of it, and they have to fight it physically, but it was way beyond that. The core of it, the real truth of it, was that they didn't want to wipe out the Jewish people as persons. They wanted to wipe out the Jewish belief system. They wanted to get rid of this devotion and commitment that the Jewish people have to this unseen, unknown God that didn't make sense, that transcended logic. That's what they were trying to wipe out. That's what the real truth of the story of Hanukkah is. It's not just about, oh, menorah and Hanukkah gelt and dreidels. This is what's actually going on, which we see now so much of what we'll talk about what was actually going on there. Things have not changed. You leave out what's going on in the culture today and the demonization of religion and things like that, you see it's the same thing about what they're aiming for. One thing that it does, that it also wants to emphasize this whole thing of why the oil being destroyed is such a big deal, because this is actually from Rambam Maimonides. Rambam in his Hilchos Beis HaBechira. So when the Rambam talks about the Beis HaMikdash, and he talks about different laws and things like that, there's one section there where he says there's 10 gradations of holiness within the land of Israel. This is holy, but this is even more holy, and this is even more holy. It's kind of a side point to the maamer, but I'm sticking it in here because this is interesting information. So the 10 gradations of holiness in Israel, the Rambam says that all the cities that are surrounded by walls, as in when they went in, certain cities already had walls around them, like Yerushalayim. Any of the other cities that today would celebrate Shushan Purim is kind of where you get the idea of that. So any of these cities that had a wall around it, these are considered holier cities. So you have the land of Israel is very holy, but the ones with the walls around them, these are next level of holy. After that, well, we kind of said Yerushalayim, but Yerushalayim is even more holy. The land of Israel is holy, these walled cities are holy, and then Jerusalem is even more holy than all of them. After that, you have Har Bayis, which is the Temple Mount. Of course, the Temple Mount is even more holy. It's more holy than the land of Israel, more holy than the city of Jerusalem. After that, we have Bethel, which is the outer limits of the Beis HaMikdash. So once you'd be on the Temple Mount, it was a big, campus. It was a big thing you're not at the Beis HaMikdash yet, but there was a lot of section of it because there's a lot of stuff that was going on up there. After that, you have the Ezras Nashim, which is the women's courtyard, which is where the women were allowed to go until that point. So that's the women's courtyard, and also when there were prayers or whatever, that's where the women were, of course. Then you have the Ezras Yisrael, which they call the Israelites courtyard. People who are not a Kohen, not a Levi, that was their section, the men's section, that's where they could go till. After that, you have the Ezras HaKohanim, you have the Kohanim's courtyard. Okay, so some of it's like walled in sections, but as you're going in, everybody else is not allowed to pass this point. So a woman does not go into the Israelites courtyard. And within the Israelites courtyard, if they're not a Kohen, they can't go past the next point. Very, very strict rules about who can be where within the Beis HaMikdash. And then there's a section between Beit Olam Mizbeach, between the altar and the entrance hall. You can sort of see, like, you see the kind of like the door there. So you can't really see that there's an altar there, but that's the section it's talking about. So it's like, oh, almost about to enter. Now we have a new section of holiness. The Heichal, the sanctuary itself, the Kodesh. So once you walk in, and that's where the menorah was, that's where the shulchan, the showbread, and the altar for the incense. They were within this, the Heichal, within the sanctuary. Above that, we have the Kodesh HaKadosh, the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies was where the Ark was. We know that it's very holy because only the Kohen Gadol went there once a year on Yom Kippur. So only the high priest could ever walk in there, and he only went once a year. It's just showing us these different gradations of, we see there's different gradations of holiness. What does this have to do with this? Because the whole thing with the oil getting crushed and they defile the sanctuary, that's at number 9. If we haven't emphasized enough, there's something going on. There's a significance to the oil that's why this is what we're focusing on. Something else, even after the Beis HaMikdash was cleaned and purified, there still needed to be a miracle to find the oil and to light the menorah. What's the whole thing about a miracle? Because, again, they cleaned everything up and then they're like, oh, let's find oil to light the menorah. They all went on the search party. There was a scavenger hunt that ensued. And it was a miracle just that they found an oil that still had the seal on it. And then after that, there was a whole miracle with the lighting of the menorah. And this is after everything that had already occurred in the whole Hanukkah story. What is the emphasis here? We're talking about a miracle. What is a miracle? A miracle breaks, quote unquote, breaks the rules of the natural order of things. Remember when we learned about Olam is the word of hidden, and you have the name of Havaya? You have this one aspect of God, and the name of Elokim is on top of it, and that's the name of nature. Also, Kol Mach B'Echad, we learned that there's a difference between Elokim, the Shem Elokim, and the Shem Havaya. There's the one name of God, that's where creation comes from, and it's this great infinite light. But because we can't handle this world, it has to be covered over. It has to be packaged through the Shem Elokim, which is nature. Nature is how God operates within the world. And every once in a while, when there's a miracle that occurs, it's kind of like nature has parted. And we're seeing the truth of what the world, the name of God, we're seeing the truth of it. From our perspective, a miracle breaks the rules of nature. It breaks the natural order of things. Really what it is, it's an expression of the infinite light. There's this part of God, the reference of the deep, the innermost part of God, deep essence of God is called Or Ein Sof, which is the light that has no end. The Kabbalists, like they have no other way of describing it. Because how can you describe what can't be described? All you can do is say, we can't describe it. That's all you can do with it. So the way they describe it, not just God when he gets kind of contracted down into this world, not the nature part of God, because that's the part that we can kind of see. There's an aspect of God it's so beyond comprehension, which is like the truth, the real essence of God. It's the mortal mind, the finite, the angel, nobody gets it. Nobody could get it. So the only way we could describe it is we could just call it the light that has no end, just infinite. It's beyond us. So we call it miracle. What it really is an expression of this infinite light. God doesn't usually operate within miracles because he set up the world to be a world of the natural order of things. There's cause and effect within the world. There are times, though, that God does perform miracles when he has to sort of, quote unquote, like interfere, block the ball from rolling the way it's supposed to, kind of. We call it the breaking of the natural order. What it is the expression of the infinite light. Meaning, when they needed a miracle to find the oil, and when they needed a miracle to light the menorah, this was an expression of this infinite light, because this was a miracle that occurred. There was something much higher going on here right now, that the infinite light, this Or Ein Sof, had to give expression to allow this to happen. Why was it so important for them to light the menorah is kind of the question. God saw that it was very important for them to light this menorah. Well, we sort of know the answer already because we saw it already, because the whole point is to illuminate the spiritual darkness. What it means also, when you could break the natural order of things, is that we're talking about something that's beyond the natural order of things. If you remember, we had this in question 1. Question 1 told us that Hanukkah and the bowls of Sukkot, they're both 8-day holidays, and 8 is a level that's beyond creation. It's beyond the natural order. The Hishtalshelus, the chain of descent. This is the progression that occurred for the world to be created. That progression occurred in the 7 days of creation. 8 represents a number beyond the 7 days of creation. So it represents something that's beyond the natural order of things. Going back here, the expression of the infinite light, the miracle that occurs is us going beyond the natural order of things. That's us going beyond the number 7 to the number 8. Waiting for it, we're getting the setup. See where we're going with this. That's what we have also. Gam choshech lo yachshech. Even the darkness does not darken. It's kind of a literal translation. This is part of a verse that comes from Tehillim. We actually had this phrase before. Gam choshech lo yachshech mimeka. We had this in Tanya. We spoke about even the darkness does not obscure you. Even the darkness does not hide you. Because it comes from you. The whole thing with the turtle and the shell and all that stuff. See how everything comes together? We're looking at this verse again in Tehillim, but it's Gam choshech lo yachshech. Even the darkness does not darken. Then we allow this light of God to shine forth. Even darkness cannot darken. There's nothing that could block this light. There's nothing that could cause darkness within this light. Not just that, but Vavaya Yagbia Chashki, this name of Havaya. And Havaya, God, will illuminate my darkness. So it's not just that it's not going to allow for something to darken, that the darkness can't succeed where there's the infinite light. There can be no darkness before the ultimate light. Not just that, this darkness is going to become something that shines also. The darkness is going to be transformed into something that also shines. So it's not just a subduing of the darkness, it's a transformation of the darkness to something that becomes light also. Coming now back to Hanukkah, the physical mirrors the spiritual. We light the candles after sunset because we're supposed to light up the darkness. Even though in the Beis HaMikdash, they lit the candles at sunset, because of this miracle that occurred, because of the miracle of the light, the infinite light of God shining through the darkness, we want to mirror that. That's what we're mirroring, lighting up the darkness. That's what we have here. The 8 is above the natural order of things. That's why you have the Hanukkah lights are 8 and not 7, because we're talking about something that's beyond the natural order of things. So yes, we want to commemorate and celebrate the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, but that's not the end of it. Even more than all that, we are commemorating and celebrating the spiritual battle that was won then. The spiritual battle of lighting up the darkness. How did that occur? Through something that occurred beyond nature. The menorah in the Beis HaMikdash had 7 branches. 7 is the natural order of things. We have 8 because we are rising above nature. We're going beyond, something even higher than all that. What does that have to do with any of us? This Maamar was said by the Rebbe, and he quotes now a Sikha, a talk that it was given by his father-in-law, by the previous Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe. And he talks about, we're going into more about why the Greeks defiled the oil. The Greeks defiled the oil, as we said, because the entire war was a spiritual war that they were fighting. How do we see that? On Chanukah, we actually have it on Purim also. If you've heard of the Ala Nisim prayer, so you might have heard the song like Ala Nisim, V'ala Parkan. Yes, maybe. Oh, yes, there you guys know it. When you say it in davening and benching, there's a part that comes after that. That song is really only 2 lines that starts the prayer, that there's a whole paragraph that comes after that. After that goes, B'mei Matisyahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol Chashmonai Yomad. So in the days of Matisyahu, of Mattathias, who was a Kohen Gadol, Chashmonai, etc., the Greeks rose up and they fought against them and they defeated them, etc. The many were given into the hands of the few, and all that. It gives the short kind of description of what occurred from the aspect of the war and all that kind of stuff. One thing that it says, Lashkicham Torasecha ulavim mechuke ritzonecha, to make them forget your Torah and to turn them away from the statutes of your will. So let's go with what we said here. What were the Greeks fighting against? Again, they didn't want to get rid of the Jewish people from a physical standpoint. That's Haman on Purim wanted to do that. Haman wanted to wipe out the Jewish people. He didn't care what religion, anything they were. He wants the Jewish people gone. The Greeks, it was not a war of getting rid of the Jewish people. They didn't have anything against the people themselves, the bodies. They didn't have anything against it. What was their problem? Lashkicham Torasecha, to forget your Torah and the statutes of your will. The war, the spiritual war that was going on, is that the Greeks, they were a culture of secularism and hedonism. They were a culture of living for the body, for the mind, for the now. Versus the Jewish people, they were fighting for spirituality and divinity. They were saying that the human body is not the be-all to end-all. The human mind is not the be-all to end-all. And this is what they were trying to eradicate. This is what they wanted to get rid of. The Greeks didn't care that the Jewish people studied Torah. They didn't care that they had mitzvos and stuff that they did. What they cared was that it was your Torah. They cared that we were like, we have a Torah. And they're like, great, we love philosophy. There's a lot of great Greek philosophers. And we're like, no, it's not philosophy. This is God's Torah that he gave us. And I'm like, wait a second. Too much. That's too far. You had me at God. No. Everything you said is fine. The Torah saw some nice stories in it. This is a wonderful storybook. The Jewish people are like, no, it's not a storybook. This is God's word. And the Greeks are like, no, can't have this. What is this God? This invisible God? What are you talking about? Right? We see also, we talk about the Greeks, the whole pantheon that they had. Many gods, all created in the image of man. Gods who are jealous, gods who are like sleeping around and doing all this crazy stuff. That's what the Greek gods are. You have the Jewish people who are like, there's one God, we can see. We are created in his image. He's not created in our image. What they were fighting against is the secularism and the hedonism. Let's study Torah, but forget that God's part of the Torah. Oh, look, it's a nice story. It's a nice philosophy. There's a lot of beautiful things. The Greeks studied the Torah. The first language that the Torah was translated into was Greek. There's something there. God doesn't just let stuff happen. And the Greeks, there's a lot of nice stuff here. Don't do unto others, or you don't want done to yourself. This is great, but great wisdom in this book. And they're like, no, it's not just a book. This is something holy. And that's what the Greeks are trying to get rid of. That's what the war was against. So the whole thing about what they're trying to nullify, or they're trying to get rid of, is the whole divine aspect of things. Get rid of the God aspect of the Torah. And we see kind of like the gradation of the way they were doing things, of like, no, just come and join us in the gymnasium. Come, it's all about the body. We should worship the body and all that sort of stuff. We'll all be bodybuilders together. And then we see that eventually they started saying Bris, Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos. They started saying none of this. We don't want any of this. All these things became forbidden from the Greeks during the time of Hanukkah. They started saying, not this commandment, not this commandment, not this commandment. Because when they saw that they couldn't reach them, just let's have a nice talk with each other and just get rid of the goddess. And they're like, no. They're like, fine, then we're not going to let you do these things. It says, Ki chachmasam v'naschem le'nei ha'amim. For that is your wisdom and your understanding in the eyes of the nations. Let's talk about the Torah. We agree that Torah is a book of wisdom. We agree that there's a depth to Torah that's worthy of study, whether or not you're a Jewish person. But that's not the end of it. But the Greeks wanted us for us to stop there. It's a great book of wisdom. And we're like, no, it doesn't stop there. This is God's wisdom. This is God's Torah. If you see Lashkichem Tarsecha Avir Mechuke Ritzonecha, Mechuke, that word here, that's a word that means statutes. So if you recognize this, the mitzvahs are divided into 3 sections, 3 categories. You have what's called edus. Edus, they call it the testimonials. Those are all the mitzvahs of like Pesach and Shavuos and Sukkot, anything that testifies. So we call it testimonials, that these are things that happen, so we do things today to testify to those things that occurred. We wouldn't necessarily come up with them on our own, but once they've been commanded, we understand what their purpose is. So for example, matzah on Pesach. Well, we had matzah because the bread didn't rise. Oh, now we understand why we have matzah. Why do we celebrate Sukkot? Oh, the clouds of glory protected us, da-da-da. Okay, now we understand why we have the Sukkot. We wouldn't have thought of making a Sukkah by ourselves, but now that you told it to us, we get it now. That's edus. As far as the edus were concerned, the Greeks were like, okay, this is a little bit weird, but we get it. We have to have the ceremonials. We have to have these things. We understand these. Fine, whatever, you can keep them. Well, from the beginning, they didn't care about it. Then we have what's called mishpatim. They translate as kind of like judicial laws. That's the ones that the need and the function are overtly logical. These are ones that it makes sense, and theoretically, if the Torah hadn't been given, we'd probably figure it out on our own. So for example, don't murder, don't kidnap, don't commit adultery, or all this kind of stuff. So these things, they make sense to us. We're like, oh yes, we understand that a well-functioning society would need these kinds of things. The edus and the mishpatim, the Greeks didn't necessarily have a problem with this. As far as like from one aspect of things. They're like, look, whatever, God said make a court of law, courts of law are good, great, no problem. Now we have these things that are called the chukim. You say mechuke, chok, this is where it comes from. These are what we call the statutes. These are things that we don't get them. They make no sense. For example, kosher. Kosher makes sense to you? We eat the domesticated non-predator animals. Okay, well, a pig's not a predator. Maybe a wild hog. But a pig, you raise them on a farm. How come we can't eat pig? Makes sense? Because God said so. No, it doesn't have the kosher signs, but what are the kosher, like what? What does that have to do with anything? God said this is a sign. Okay, but why? What do you have against the pig? Don't eat a raptor. Okay, fine. Don't eat a vulture. Fine. Why can we eat a horse? We can eat a cow. Let's just eat a horse and a cow. One runs faster. Fine. Why? Horses aren't predators. Are they predators? I don't think horses aren't predators. They're herbivores. They eat oats, grass. As far as I know, why can't we eat them? God said don't eat whatever. Yes, but why? So that doesn't make sense. You have other mitzvahs that don't make sense. You have the thing of shatnez. Don't mix wool and linen together. Well, who cares? Oh, like what's going to happen? It's going to be a chemical imbalance? Something going to start smoking? We don't know. There's all thing with the laws of purity and impurity and the paraduma, the red heifer. It makes no sense. Even King Solomon said, I can't make heads or tails of this. King Solomon couldn't even figure something out. On one level, those are the ones that they have the biggest problem with. Stop doing these things that make no sense. Because for the Greeks, what is the ultimate? The human mind. We know from all the Greek philosophers. The ultimate for them is the human mind and the human body. That's what they're very into. They exercise naked for all those reasons. Why do you think they did these things? Because what do we celebrate the most? Secularism and hedonism. We celebrate the mind and we celebrate the body. So we celebrate what the human mind can understand. That is the highest level we can reach. Pushing the human mind to reach its highest level. Pushing the body to be its finest. My body's a temple. This is the culture. And you're going to tell us now that you're going to fulfill this thing that makes absolutely no sense. It challenges the mind in that regard. And not just that, you're submitting your mind, which is your most exalted of what you have, which is what raises you above all else. You're not going to submit it to a higher being by fulfilling a commandment that makes no sense. That's what they wanted to get rid of. And they're like, no, now you've gone too far. Everything else, if you want to talk about philosophy and stories and whatever, fine. We love philosophy, we love stories. But you're talking about now that you're going to submit your own mind, you're going to give up your own will to something, for something that makes no sense, for this higher being that you think exists above you, that we're not okay with. That's why the emphasis here, Lashkichem Torah Secha, to forget your Torah. Who else's Torah are we forgetting? It could have said Lashkichem Esa Torah. They wanted them to forget the Torah. That makes sense. Why don't you say Lashkichem Torah Secha, to forget your Torah? Because what they wanted to do was take out the your. They wanted to take out the your from the Torah. They wanted to take God out from the Torah. Torah is beautiful, but take God out of it. Also, Mechuke Ritzenech, from the statutes of your will, it's the same thing. These statutes, these chok, it makes no sense. That God decided, that's what you guys are going to do? That's one thing. Which again, it's highlighting the fact that the Greeks were fighting a spiritual war. But we have the next thing, what's the next thing we're going to go in for the next class, is that there's a level of what the Greeks were fighting against, that it wasn't even the mitzvahs that made sense, they were fighting against that also. Just the fact that you say that you're doing this because God commanded you, that's already not okay also. That's what they were trying to wipe out, and that is what the victory of Hanukkah was all about. What are we representing? We rose to a level above the natural order of things. Above secularism, above hedonism. We regained, retained, reasserted spirituality and divinity with the miracle of Hanukkah. That's why we light the menorah when it's dark. That's why our menorah has 8 branches instead of only 7. Because this is actually what we're celebrating. That we've overcome, we have defeated. And please God, we should do it in our days too. Because we see this is not a new fight. The fight's back where it's today. we have a fight against secularism also. I did all this research for my grandfather's book. If you look back, starting at least through the 1900s, but you definitely look at the 50s and the 60s, you see them very surgically start removing God from the picture. I'm talking about politicians and all these movements and all that kind of stuff. We're getting rid of school prayer, the whole explosion of nudity and stuff like that in film, which they used to not do it because they were afraid of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church would say, no, we condemn this film, and then nobody would watch it. But this is what they were tearing themselves away from. They very carefully, there was a lot of fights against religious instruction, all that kind of stuff. All of this is going on through the 50s and 60s. And the fact that where we are today, I'll assert, it starts with taking God out of the picture. Part of why we're still lighting the Hanukkah menorah today is because we're still trying to illuminate the spiritual darkness. This is what's going on for Hanukkah. That's it for today, and we shall resume, please God, next time.